Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today, I'm joined with my good friends, John and David, the debt-free guys. How you doing today, guys?
Hi there. We're good. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well, glad to have you guys on the show. We had David on, I think it was about a year and a half ago at FinCon, but never had a chance to get both of you guys on. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your background because I think to me it's fascinating. I know we've been friends for a while, but tell us a bit about your background. How'd you guys get into being debt-free guys?
Oh, how far back do you want to go?
You tell me.
Our debt stories go back
Born in 1973. I guess I'll start with the crux of the story. Is about a year and a half after David and I got together, we finally had this come to Jesus moment that we had $51,000 in credit card debt. The irony was, though, at the time, we had 15 years of combined experience in financial services, helping other people with their money. So we're helping them plan for retirement, helping them pay off debt, helping them prepare to put their kids through college, all improve their credit score, all the good stuff. But we weren't applying any of it to our own lives. And when we realized how much debt we had, we sort of peeled back the onion and we're like, oh, we've been acquiring this for some time now. So I think the debt story actually for both of us probably goes back to the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I'll say that for me, I started acquiring debt at a pretty young age. I was 19, maybe I can't remember, it was 19 or 20. My parents wanted to give me a graduation present, and so they saved up some money, and I saved up some money, and they paid for half of a trip for me to go to Ireland and England. We had lived in Ireland for a while when I was younger, so I was going back to visit friends. And my mom got me a credit card at the credit union as an emergency only credit card. John likes to joke that I never saw the back of an ambulance or a police car, but I still came home with a credit card full of debt. And that was my first time experiencing what it was like to have a credit card. And I put this out on Twitter a while back ago, and maybe a couple of weeks ago, that one of the worst days of my life, I didn't know this, but one of the worst days of my life was when I got a balance increase for the very first time. A credit limit increase for the very first time on my credit card. It went from $500 to $1,000. And I was like, all of a sudden the floodgates of heaven opened up and cash came rolling into me. It was like, yeah, I have money to spend now. And I think that was probably part of the problem. Was I always looked at my credit cards as my money. I could spend this however I want to. And that's what got me in trouble.
So What do you find is so attractive about debt? Because so many people have problems with debt, and with interest rates climbing, it's going to be even a bigger problem. So what's so attractive about it that kind of reels people in?
I think it's ease of access. It's become, I think, it's just a little bit too easy to get too much available credit. And I think, unfortunately, wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. And that's been going on for decades. And I think marketers are getting better at their marketing strategies, and we're constantly being marketed to all the time, everywhere. Logging onto this call, Zoom popped up an ad for me to look at something. So it's like you keep getting advertised to, and you think that you're not going to be happy unless you have all these things. And so I think the ease of access, as well as I think the skills of the marketers.
Yeah. We also like to talk about the debt depression spiral. This is something that we believe that a lot of people get into. Well, I'll agree with John. This idea of ease of access is probably where it starts. But we have a feeling, and it's either it's depression or it's anger, or it's frustration, we're tired, we're angry, we're hungry, whatever the feeling is, and our body, mentally and physically, our brain says to our body, let's figure out how to make this feeling go away. This isn't a good feeling. Let's figure out how to make it go away. And for the vast majority of us, we can easily turn to something that allows us to make that go away, whether that's hopping online on Amazon and spending some money, whether it's going out with our friends and drinking a little too much, going out to a nice dinner, going out and buying a nice vacation. All of those things, it's an easy, quick fix to the feelings that we have, instead of actually uncovering what those feelings really are, many of us turn to, I'm just going to swipe a card. And if we don't have cash, if we're not using cash to cover those, then many of us, 3 to 4 weeks later, we get a bill in the mail, we stare at that number, and all of a sudden we have another rush of feelings. Why don't I make enough money? Why does everybody have such a better life than me? Why do I have to struggle so much? And so we get these feelings again, and more often than not, those are feelings of depression. And then we just start the spiral all over again. We go back to, how do I make this feeling go away? And for many of us, this is such an unconscious thing that happens. We aren't aware of it, that, as John mentioned, we get then marketers who are trying to push stuff in front of us that we say, okay, if I have that experience, I'll be happy. If I have that for dinner, I'll be happy. If we buy that kind of car, I'll be happy. If we live in this neighborhood, I'll be happy. And then we just continue to go down this path of spending, and consuming in the attempt to make ourselves feel better.
So, I mean, I totally understand that, but I mean, what can people do to address that? Because to me, it seems like, there's certainly a whole generation of people, I think starting with the millennials, certainly, but my generation had a little bit of it as well. Like, how do people address that? I mean, it's obviously a pervasive problem.
Yeah, we were all sort of on this hedonic treadmill, and let's be real. I mean, it's not like this is just a consumer, individual American problem. I mean, look at our government spending. Like, when was the last time we balanced the budget, right? So it's not. This is, I think, it's becoming more and more pervasive in our entire economy, not just the individual consumer or the individual household. I think for David and me, what we ended up doing was one of the best exercises that he did after we realized how much credit card debt we had. Was he grabbed all of our account statements, logged into all of our accounts online, like everything you could find, credit cards, brokerage accounts, checking accounts, whatnot. And he itemized all of our expenses for an entire year. And it had, on paper, we were living like rock stars. But had you asked us about the quality of our lives up until that point, we would have said, things are okay, but they're not amazing. They could be better, but they could be worse. But on paper, we were living like rock stars. We were spending thousands of dollars a month on wine. We were going out to dinner multiple times a week. There were points in time when we were spending $400 a week dining out, and also spending $400 a week at the grocery store.
And this was in 2005.
2005 for
this
two
isn't like
people.
It was recently with all the inflation. This is 2005.
Yeah, before eggs became $10 a dozen. And so we were looking at our expenses, and we're like, well, apparently we should be loving our lives right now, but with the way that we're spending, we're not. So why are we spending in such a way that's not fueling, that's not inspiring us, not fueling our soul? What's going on here? Clearly, whatever we're spending our money on is not really making us happy. And I think that's maybe one of the number one questions that people need to ask if they continue to find themselves on this debt depression spiral is, well, why can't I get off of this treadmill? What's keeping me on here? And arguably, the things that you're buying aren't providing you the satisfaction that you're hoping that they would, whether those are experiences or whether those are actual tangible things. And so David and I had, and then this took us several years to peel back this onion. This wasn't an overnight or a weekend exercise. But we had to ask ourselves, well, what would make us happy? What is it we really want our lives to look like? If all these showy things that we have, the designer jeans, the fancy cars, the great vacations, the happy hours that are always 6 hours, they're not making us truly happy, then what would? And then when we realized what those things were, and we aligned our spending accordingly, we were able to more easily pay off our debt. And then our lives have been much better ever since, even though I don't know that we own a designer item of clothing in our closet right now. Most of our t-shirts come from Amazon.
The thing is that, we don't want to be these Debbie Downers on having nice things or having nice experiences. All of those things can add to the value of our lives. But when we allow those things or experiences to become a financial stressor for us, then we start to chase the dragon of I need to have a better experience because I feel bad about myself because of my financial situation, or I'm stressed and I need to escape the stress. And so there's nothing wrong with enjoying nice things. Find out what you really, really enjoy. I mean, if you do really, really, really enjoy travel, focus your money on figuring out how to travel and do that the way that you want to. You don't, I think it's Paula Pant says, you can afford anything, you just can't afford everything. And that's, I think, the problem is that we live in a culture today, especially this kind of success porn culture, right? Everybody's out there talking about how successful they are, and I did this, and I became a millionaire in 30 days, and blah blah, and everybody's like, well, feeling inadequate because of that. And you just have to disengage and say, what's the best for me?
So yeah, you guys talked about a lot of stuff I want to dig into a little bit. So I remember the first time I went through and itemized all my expenses and debt. That's really painful. Like, you have this disconnect between what you think is reality. Like you said, you're just going out and spending money every night, which I certainly spend enough time doing that. And then the reality of like, oh crap, like these don't line up. But that's a painful process. Like, how would you recommend people go through it in a way that's going to, and personally, I think the process is the goal, right? Like the process is what helps you, not the end result. So how do you kind of go about that in a way that isn't too painful, where people are like, enough, I'm not doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We used to have a program called the credit card payoff course, and we would make all of our we would have all of our students go through that. And then one of the first exercises we would have them do was the spending analysis, where they would analyze their spending for an entire year. And it was so always entertaining, because when they got the assignment, they would like begrudgingly want to do it and roll their eyes and throw up their arms and wail. And but the more people actually did it, the more they realized the value of actually doing the exercise. So over time, students who were in the program a little bit longer were actually saying, it sucks, but you got to do it. You're going to hate it. Just commit a weekend or two and make sure it, and just make it happen. And it's going to be miserable. We've all been through it, but it's so eye-opening when you actually do that exercise. That said, we understand that that's not within everybody's capacity to do. And you don't always have the support system like a credit card payoff course like we had to help get you through that. So at the very least, do 3 to 6 months. The only problem is the shorter duration you use, the more annual expenses kind of throw you off whack. So if you happen to use October, November, December as the quarter you're going to analyze, well, the holiday season could overinflate what you spend in certain areas, right? If that's not within your capacity, there are some great tools out there. I know Mint has a great app that helps you itemize your expenses. Personal Capital has a great app that helps you itemize your expenses. I think that does a pretty
yeah, and they've just rebranded. Personal Capital is now Empower. The app is called Empower.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
It literally that just happened like in the last month.
Oh,
so, yeah. But John brings up the point. It can be painful, like you said. It can be painful. It can be difficult. And I kind of liken it to, you have a broken bone, right? And you can choose to not go get that bone fixed and deal with the results of that for the rest of your life, or you can deal with getting that bone set, and hopefully you have very minimal impacts after you take a little bit of time to heal. Right? And this kind of the same thing can happen with us taking a look at our finances. But the other important thing here is that is to take it slow and in small steps, right? It's if we do it in a big burst, oftentimes we won't create a habit. And when we don't create a habit, then the change never sticks, right? So figure out a way to habit stack this, right? You don't have to all of a sudden go on a financial extreme diet, right? This is not a financial detox where you're not going to spend any money for the next 6 months. It's, how do I figure out to change one of these categories? If I find that dining out is the thing that's really affecting me a lot, how do we scale our dining back? If we're going out on an average 5 days a week, how do we bump it down to 4 for this month, and bump it down to 3 the month after that, and bump it down to 2 the month after that, if that's where your budget needs to get to?
Okay, that's great. So, you talked a lot about, how people shall I put this? How people use debt spending to find happiness. And I think you both said you spent some time to figure out what makes you happy. How did you go through that process? Because I think, searching for happiness is a really deep soul searching process. And it's not like, oh, I just figured, like for me, I spent most of my career not understanding what motivated me. It took me like 18 years to figure out what actually motivated me. I thought it was one thing, it ended up being something completely different. So how do you kind of go through that in a way that isn't overly frustrating for somebody who's trying to do this for the first time?
Sure. It's interesting. We did a podcast with a psychiatrist. I can't remember what.
I don't know which one you're talking about yet.
So it's individual. I can't remember his name.
We've had 384 episodes. Help me out.
He wrote a book basically about how to be miserable. And
Dr. Randy Patterson from Canada.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry.
So he basically said the reality is that the vast majority of us already know how to be miserable. We just need to look at what we're doing on a regular basis, because if our lives aren't happy now and we want them to change, we know what's making us miserable. So the first thing I think for a lot of people to do is look at what you're doing right now. What is it that you're spending your money on right now? If you're not happy, then maybe you need to refocus, right? If I'm not happy with my career, if I'm not happy with where I live in the country, if I'm not happy with my daily life, then I know that those are the things that if I just do more of them, they're not going to make it better, right? I gotta figure out how to scale those back and move then on to something else. And the more often than not, we can get glimmers of what we do like when we start to look at what we're doing on a regular basis. We see the things that actually do bring us really contentment. I'm not talking about, yay, that Starbucks latte makes me really happy for 7 minutes in the morning, or this break on the weekend where we take off and go to the mountains or to the beach. That doesn't make me truly happy. It's just an activity that I'm using to escape. Those things we may look at those and say they bring me happiness, but are they contentment that brings me long-term happiness?
Okay. So one question that kind of I want to come back to, because we started talking about it, was getting rid of debt. And you mentioned the first thing is to sit down and kind of itemize it. But what should people do once they go through all that?
Yeah. Well, we had $51,000 in credit card debt. And when we did that spending analysis, one of the variables that struck us in the face was that we were spending $10,000 a year subsidizing that debt. That was just due to the high credit card interest rates. So we looked at the Snowball method and we looked at the Avalanche method, because those were the most popular methods at the time. And we actually didn't even look them up online, because this is how long ago this was. We actually went to the library, got books. A library is a place that has a whole bunch of actual physical books that you can go to, and you can borrow them for a couple of weeks. And so we had like a whole bunch of books, and so we read about these different methods. And David crunched the numbers because he's the math person, and he said it's going to take us like 5 to 8 years to pay this debt off. And one, I don't have that patience, but that's assuming we make no mistakes, and we make mistakes all the time. So we're like, we're going to be paying this off for a decade. And we didn't think that was fair. And two, we thought there's got to be a way to make this go away more quickly, because we just don't have that kind of patience. So when we saw that variable of $10,000 a year was what that was costing us, we said, how can we make that go away? And that was when we were like, okay, well, let's see if there's some options out there to not have to pay any interest. And there are a plethora of zero interest rate balance transfer cards available at that time. And David crunched some more numbers, and even with the transfer fee of anywhere from, sometimes it's 0, but usually 1 to 5%. If we were diligent about paying off our debt, we could actually do it in 2.5 to 3 years. And that those additional fees that we would have to use once or twice wouldn't be too egregious for us. So that's when we kind of came up with what we call our debt lasso method, which is lowering your credit card interest rate to as low a rate as possible, ideally 0, and your credit card balances to as few locations as possible. And then the follow-up question to that for most people is this just debt consolidation? Yes and no. Ultimately, it's a 5-step process, because we've worked with people in the past who have done debt consolidation. They've gotten personal loans, they've lowered their interest rates, and they thought with the theory that they're going to pay off their debt, but they actually haven't created a process to actually pay that debt off. And then all of a sudden, now they've got this personal loan, and then they've also got their credit card maxed out again. So it's really a 5-step process. The first being two sub-steps. One being commit to not acquiring any more debt, if at all possible. Stop using your cards, stop acquiring more credit card debt. And then 2, make a commitment to send a specific dollar amount to your credit cards every single month, come hell or high water. The second step is to trim. If based on that amount you've committed to sending to your credit cards every single month, you can pay off 2 or 3 credit cards in the first couple of months, go ahead and do that. That's the Snowball method. Get yourself some quick wins and feel like you're making some major success. And then step 3 is what we call
that's the lasso.
That's the lasso step. I just drew a blank. That's the lasso step, where you rein in your credit card debt to as few locations as possible, ideally to the lowest interest rate as possible. Then step 4 is to automate, get all this set up through bill pay or whatever, so all your bills are paid in full, on time, every single month. And then step 5 is to monitor. Make sure all those systems are working for you so you don't miss a payment, because if you miss a payment, that's going to hurt your credit score. But then also, when you've paid off a credit card, you made a commitment to send a specific amount to your credit cards every month. You want to make sure that you transfer that residual over to the next credit card so you can pay that credit card off.
That's great. I have some kind of follow-up questions given the environment that we're in. I've been watching very closely the savings rate of people in the U.S. and the average credit card balance, and the savings rate is, I think it's like 3. It's like 2.5. It's the lowest it's been, and the average credit card debt is skyrocketing. And at the same time, just give you my personal reference. Everyone's got different rates, but one of my credit cards is 20%. My other one is 10. The 10 one was the lowest I've seen. Basically, it gave me like 4 or 5% up until like last year. It was the lowest I've seen. And then the other one was always, it's Amex. They kind of screw you any chance they get. But my point is that we've gone from an environment where we had really low rates and people could run balances without a problem, and now all of a sudden the rates are doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and these are from cards that literally they're like, we don't have a lower rate.
Yes.
And it's not because of they told me flat out, it's not because of your credit. You have good credit. We just don't have a lower rate. So how do people, and this is assuming you have good credit, like if people don't have good credit, you're looking way higher. So how do people get out of this when it's like, all right, you put together a plan, and then all of a sudden your rate goes from 10% up to 20%, and now you're SOL again. So like, how do people deal with this new challenge they're facing?
Yeah, you have to gamify the system, right? Any rate decrease is going to allow you to put more money towards your principal, rather than paying the bank for the credit or the debt. Then you're paying it off, right? And we've worked with clients who are like, well, my credit score isn't that great. The only offer I could qualify for was a 9.99% rate. And we're like, well, that's better than 26%, right? It's 16% less annually that you're going to be paying. Do that transfer. The reality is that try to get to it to as low as you can get it. If you can get it to 0, or you can find a low interest loan, and that may be the case. That may be one of the things right now, is that there are some places, especially if you have decent credit, that are offering, you can lock in a rate for a longer term, right? So when we did balance transfers, but for some people, it is a personal loan. You just have to make sure you're committed to not using that card again. And that's, I think, one of the big issues. This whole idea of, change doesn't happen unless change happens. And so we have to figure out, how do we change something about our lives? And we have to make a commitment to changing our lives. I'm going to throw in an analogy here, an example. You know, a lot of people look at Michael Phelps, and the greatest swimmer ever in the history of the sport. And a lot of people look at him and say, well, yeah, he's got the perfect body for it. Right. We always want to find the excuse as to why he was able to do what he did. Right. But we always forget that he got up every morning at 3:30. He was in the pool for 2.5 hours every single day before he went to school. He went to the pool every single day after he got off of school. He ate 15,000 calories a day, right? I mean, all of us would love to be.
That's the one I'm succeeding at.
Yeah, I do
That's
that
the
too.
one I'm really good at. But I still can't swim that fast.
And and I'm sure there were plenty of days where he was like, you know, I just don't feel like doing this. But there were also days where he was loving it. He absolutely loved what he did. And that's one of the things that John and I say. You have to figure out how to gamify your whole process. How do you have to gamify reducing your expenses? One of the challenges that we did for each other was, I called John one day, or I think I texted him from work, and I said, let's go out on a date tonight. And he said, okay, we can go out on a date, but you have to make sure that date costs $20 or less. And so it was I wanted to have, we still found ways to have fun and
It was
enjoy life.
$22.
We ended up spending I think it was $21.67 or something like
Like
that.
an
We
ice
went
cream.
over a little bit, but
We had to tip
we
somebody.
ate, we saw a movie and we had something to eat,
Yeah,
right?
good.
And so that cost us $22.
But
When
think,
was that? I mean, that's like
this is
one
what
movie
we were
ticket
still
right
using
now.
this. We were using the entertainment book when the entertainment book was just an actual physical book.
Okay.
Somebody gave it to us for the. I think our real estate agent gave it to us as the gift or whatever, and so we
Nice.
were using the entertainment books. We used 2 or 3 coupons in there.
Yeah.
And we committed to that, because usually those are just loss leaders, right? They're like, okay, we'll give you this free ice cream cone, but hopefully you give like, ice cream for your entire family. We're like, no, we're going to stick with what the actual the ticket coupon is for, and nothing more.
Nice.
But I think the way all this gets a little bit even easier is go back to what we talked about earlier, is to figure out what's most important to you. What is it you want your life to look like? What purchases, or how do you use your money that actually really inspire and excite you? Because that's basically figuring out what your why is. When you figure out what your why is, then the how gets a whole lot easier, right? So for us, for David and me, we're like, okay, we love traveling, but one of the things that we hate about traveling is that every time we would come back, we'd have this gigantic credit card hangover, and then we'd be down on that debt depression spiral again. So if we were able to pay off our credit card debt and then come up with a strategy to actually travel using reward points, but actually come home with no credit card debt, how much better would that be? And that was our inspiration of when times got tough, when during that 2.5 to 3 years when it took us to pay off our debt, and it was the middle of winter and we wanted to go out and have a baller weekend. We're like, all right, no, our goal is to go to Mexico in a couple months, and we'd rather have that margarita in Puerto Vallarta rather than downtown in Denver.
Yeah, it gets challenging, and I think, it's funny because as you go through life and you have your fun stage, right? When you're single, you're going out and partying every day, and then you're spending money you in some cases don't have, but then you get married, you have a family, you buy a house, you do all the things that just keep ratcheting up the expenses as people age. And to me, I find it interesting that more people don't have problems with this. A lot of people are on the edge. They're spending way more than they can. And I guess, to me, I wonder, like, is society, do people have FOMO too much, where they can't help but not want to keep up with the Joneses? Like, I struggle, like, personally, like, I'm not a keep up with the Joneses guy. If anything, I hate the Joneses. Like, I'm steering clear of them. But I also recognize that there is a very heavy influence on, like, for my kids. It's like, yeah, I don't want to keep up with the Joneses, but if you don't, then your kid is, like, kind of left out, and all these other kids are doing these things. So it's a really, society's a heavy influence. So how do people I guess reduce that, or find ways to keep that influence from kind of destroying your credit and your life?
I don't know that there's an answer to that. I think we've created an economy, I think, where it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to spend as much money as possible. I mean, I think I was surprised to see there was an article I read last night from Carl Icahn talking about SVB, and he said this is a systemic problem. We have people who are leading these major corporations who don't really know what they're doing, and when during the fat times, they're all just like taking these bonuses, and not managing towards the worst common denominator at all. And then all of a sudden, a hiccup comes along, and then it blows up an entire part of the economy for the entire world at this point now, right? So I don't know that I think it's a really esoteric question. I think. Do you have an answer?
No, well, it's interesting. We actually now have an industry of individuals who that's their whole goal is to get you to buy something. They're called influencers. We've created a segment in our economy, and what's so interesting about this is you ask kids what they want to do today. It used to be that they wanted to grow up and they wanted to be something like a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman or nurse or a school teacher, and they had those as their goals. And then we started seeing kids switch into they wanted to be a sports star and they wanted to be a model and they wanted to do something that's a little bit more kind of maybe glamorous. And now the vast majority of kids, they just want to post their lives online so that they can make somebody go buy something. Right. And it's so funny that that's the direction that our society is moving, is that the aspirations that we have is figuring out how to get people to spend more money. And I will say that there is probably one thing that you may it might be worth trying to keep up with the Joneses with, and that is the income, right? A lot of people, they have no problem figuring out how to try to keep up with the spending, but we never talk about what our income levels are, right? Unless you're bragging about it. And we do know that there are some people who brag about it, but we need to get over this whole taboo and idea that talking about how much money we make is an important reason or an important way to make sure that all sectors of society are keeping up financially, right? That helps more. We can help more people by talking about how it is that we get paid, or what we should be get paid, or how fairly we get paid, because you're expected to buy this now. I think it's what, $387,000 starter house for your family. You're going to have to more, I saw this headlines today, the 40-year mortgage is back, right? I mean, we are hawking our futures to have a life today.
And we just saw the other day the 72-month car loan, right, is now.
I think that the average car loan is 74 months.
74 months.
I think it's. I think it is. I think it's 74 months. And so, if we talk more about how we can make money, how we make our money, what is a fair wage for us, and how we can use our money in ways to make our lives more balanced, then we won't necessarily be as inclined to be chasing after the things that make us feel like we have a life that is keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah. I guess it's an ongoing question. I mean, we have median income has stagnated for the last 20 years. And it's gone up and down, but it's basically within a range. And I totally agree. I think most people talk about debt reduction. They don't talk about income increase, right? There's two ways to address the problem. But I did want to ask one question, because I know we got to wrap it up in the interest of time, and I probably have you guys back soon, because I love our conversation so much. You mentioned debt transfers. Does that affect credit score? So if you just say, all right, I've got a bunch of 10 to 20% credit card interest debt, and I got this card that's saying, hey, you want to do a debt transfer for 0% for 6 to 12 months. Does that affect your credit score if you transfer that?
The actual transfer doesn't, but typically you have to do a hard credit pull before you can get approved for that new card. And that can affect your credit score 3 to 5 points, I think was the last time we looked.
Well, yeah, you have to do it strategically, right? It's like most financial things, you have to do it strategically. If you go out there and you apply for 10 different cards to do balance transfers all at the same time, then all of a sudden the credit agencies go, okay, what the heck is going on with this person? There's some risk here. We need to drop their credit score. And so it's the multiple applications all in a short time period is going to affect your credit score negatively. Actually getting another card with another balance set of a credit line available to you can actually improve your credit score in some cases, because credit utilization is one of the factors as to whether or not your or what your credit score is. And credit utilization is the percentage of your overall available credit that you have to you that you're using. So if I have one credit card that has a $10,000 available balance and I've got $10,000 on it, I'm using 100% of it. And then all of a sudden I get another balance transfer card that has another $10,000 credit limit on it, and I transfer that, all of a sudden I've dropped from having a 100% credit utilization down to a 50% credit utilization. That probably going down to 50 is probably not going to help you all that much. But as soon as you start getting into the 30 and 40% range, you're going to start to see that that could boost your credit score.
That isn't motivation to just get more available credit.
Yeah, just be careful with it, right?
That's swimming in the deep end. Don't do it unless you know how to do it.
Don't try this at home.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate you guys coming to the show and sharing your wisdom with me and certainly my audience. Any final thoughts, and where can people find more about you guys?
I just appreciate that you think we're wise. I'll have to tell my mom. No, just thank you for the opportunity to come on your show. Unfortunately, I've never been on the show before.
Yeah.
Now you can cross that off your bucket list.
And then we're Debt Free Guys we have debtfreeguys.com, and then we have the Queer Money podcast, both websites. And then you can find us at debtfreeguys.com or Queer Money on almost any social media platform.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And for those of the listeners who haven't seen me posting on social media, I was actually on your guys' show somewhat recently, and you guys did a great job at the interview. So appreciate the opportunity to come on your show as well. For all listeners who didn't see that interview, I highly recommend you go and check that out as well.
Very sexy topic of self-directed IRAs. I loved it.
It was a lot of fun. Like I said, I'll definitely have you guys back on soon, because debt ain't going away and interest rates aren't going down as far as I can tell. So
no, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah. So, well, thanks again for joining us, and always appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist, because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right. Well, that was a great interview with John and David. Really appreciate them coming on the show. Love those guys. They're doing such a good job out there, and I think debt is something that affects everybody. So now into the panel portion of the show, where we have our very own Barb Friedberg. Hey, Barb.
Hi, Kirk. Hi, Megan.
Hey,
How's it-
Barb. Welcome back
And-
from vacation.
And we have our own Megan Gorman. Hey, Megan.
Hey, guys. How you doing today?
Good, good. Well, let's dive right in. So, Barb, I know you've got some pretty strong opinions about debt. What were some of your takeaways of the interview?
I know debt's a really big problem. And one of the things that strikes me when I'm shopping online, one of my guilty pleasures is looking through my Instagram feed. I love home decorating and DIY projects. So I follow all these sorts of things on Instagram. But then they have peppered in a couple of ads on different related home decorating things. I make the mistake of clicking on those. And all of a sudden, I'm getting like everywhere I search online are home decorating DIY ads. And for someone that is, not really disciplined, you could end up being so bombarded with opportunities to buy that it's almost hard to say no. And I think the societal push to spend is overwhelming today versus how it was in the past. And I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, I would say that's a huge problem. So, Megan, what about you? What are some of your takeaways?
Well, first of all, I forgot about the entertainment book until they brought it up. Like, I haven't seen one of those in 20 years. God bless those guys.
I know. We used to get one of those religiously every year. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's like a paper version of Groupon.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There was a lot to take away from this. I think they really, really lay it out quite well. But I liked the fact in their story that it's a story of resiliency, right? Because I think when you are struggling in debt, there is a lot of psychological issues that come with it, right? It's overwhelming to see your way through. And I like the fact that they talked about the fact that they had to work through it, in terms of managing credit card debt. I had to do it in my 20s. I had to have a charge off, which was horrifying at the time. But I think what I see in terms of controlling expenses, which is part of debt management, is I see that it doesn't matter what your wealth band is, right? Everybody struggles with it. And, it's not something that becomes easy. I think the people who manage it the best control the controllables, right? So, they talk about budgeting, and I liked the fact that they were like, you should really do a 12-month budget. And they're right, because there are certain items that are big ticket items, right? Yesterday here was property tax day in California, right? That's a big ticket item. It doesn't happen every month. And yes, Barb, I wait to the last moment to pay. But, I liked that. But I also liked the fact they said, look, if you can't do it, do the bite-sized chunks, right? It's not going to be as good as doing the 12-month, but the bite-sized chunks work really well. And I see, what I see a lot of my clients end up doing, and I think a lot of people can do this too with Basic Quicken, is they have bookkeepers, right? They hire a bookkeeper to run their expenses when they want to do that deeper drill down, and then take the year P&L and go through it and start to see what levers they can pull to mitigate cost. But I think one of the other things I'll say is, even though my clients don't struggle with debt, I often have to deal with it with family members, right? Which is, a family member has gotten themselves into tremendous credit card debt in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the thing I see my clients struggle with in helping their siblings and their friends and their other family members in terms of managing through debt is, my clients will say to me, I don't see a plan, right? I don't see a plan to work through the debt. And so I say this to anyone who's in debt and is able to get like a family member to help out. I think even if you get someone to help you through the debt, you have to have a plan. And I think these guys were really, really clear about that. And so, that's some of the stuff, the hard work that has to happen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Megan. That's great. So, Barbara, I want to get back to a point you made, which is the pervasiveness of debt. And you've obviously seen a lot. You're not, you're not into the FOMO like some people are. But let's talk about the pervasiveness of debt, because I think a lot of people just don't realize that they're kind of walking into this machine that pretty much rewards spending, and they don't understand all of the factors that are kind of hitting on them every single day, influencing them to spend. So maybe you could talk about that, because you growing up, you and I and Megan too come from a different time where this wasn't as big of a part of the culture.
Debt is so readily available today that, and it's so common that there's not even any stigma to it. And so I want to just give you a quick run back in time. When I was growing up, people didn't take out loans to go to college. Granted, college was a lot cheaper back in the dark ages when I went to college. And if you went to a state school and you worked, a good part-time job, you could pretty much pay for college on your own. Now, I understand college is very expensive today, and I am not going to go and say you can go to college easily without taking out a loan. But you don't need to max out your credit cards so that you can look rich. And I think we have to be very, very, very mindful. And the debt-free guys did a super job of putting that into the fore, that you have to make a decision about what you want your life to be. Do you want to look rich? And if you want to look rich and are not rich, you're going to go into debt. Is that worth it to you? Or would you rather come to grips with what your income is and what your expenses are? And by the way, keeping track of that is crucial, because you're never going to get control of your life if you don't know where your money is going, what you have coming in and what you have going out. Megan mentioned getting a bookkeeper. Most of us don't need a bookkeeper because we're not uber wealthy, but spend $100 to get Quicken, or use Mint, or use one of the free budgeting apps, and know what's coming in and what's going out, and then make your decisions. You see, I'm spending, $500, $1,000 on clothes a month. Really, is that what you want your earnings to go towards? And if that's super important to you and that's what really matters to you, then hey, go for it. But if it's keeping you from reaching your other goals, then you need to adjust. So you can't live a fulfilling life if you don't have control of your spending. And align your spending with your life goals. What's important to you.
So, Barbara, I want to ask, because, I know a lot of people talk about reducing debt and not keeping up with the Joneses, but I know you and I certainly don't have that kind of, we're cut from a different cloth. But I think once you're in it, it's really hard. Like if you have a group of friends and you're all used to going out and eating and doing whatever you're doing, socializing, spending money, and then you decide, hey, I'm going to make the change. You have to find new friends. Like, how do you disconnect from the existing FOMO that's already there? Because everyone else is trying to keep a certain social status, right? Like we all fall on a certain social status and we feel like we need to keep it. And if you just start saying, well, I'm going to drive a beatbox and I'm not going to get an iPhone, I'm going to get a flip phone, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And, all these things, that's great, but it changes your social status. So how do people manage that in your experience?
That is really, really hard. And what it gets down to is who you are and who you want to be. And that's a decision that, that's getting into a lot of psychology and into the existential questions that we all have, which is, what is life about? What is the meaning? What do I want my legacy to be about? Hey, Kirk, so let's go with that, huh?
Well,
Yeah.
just for all the listeners, I actually do have the meaning of life. And if you want, just feel free to reach out and I'll give it to you.
Okay, right. But they've got to pay $9.99, right? To get it.
But today it's for $8.99 for a one-time
it's
deal.
On sale, and you can get 2 of them if you just pay shipping and handling, right?
Yeah, just send over your credit card. You'll be all set.
Yeah. So nothing that is important is easy, period. I mean, nothing that you want to have in life is really easy. Talk about your marriage, talk about your, your lifestyle, whatever. And it gets down to taking a step back. Do you have to get rid of your friends? Look, if all of your friends are totally shallow and all they care about is the externals, maybe you should get rid of those friends. But I posit that you can have friends with different values as long as you're comfortable in who you are. So the interesting thing is, if I love that the debt free guy said this, because they said, choose the things that matter to you. If travel matters to you, then you take your extra money and you put it in your travel budget. But then don't expect to drive a fancy car and don't expect to eat out every night unless you have unlimited wealth. And so it's all about learning to accept who you are, learning to accept that we all have limitations. We can't all have everything that we want. And the sooner that we become aware of that and realize that, okay, so let me prioritize what's most important to me and then spend my money and my time on that. And then what is not important, you got to take a deep breath and say, okay, I have to limit the things that don't really matter to me.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it kind of brings up the point of there's some people like stuff and some people like experiences. And, you have to choose what you want to spend your money on. I enjoy experiences. I just had a birthday recently and, my family knows, like, they don't know what to get me because I don't want stuff. I don't want more stuff. I want less stuff. I want experiences. You want to, take me out to dinner. Like, let's go for a trip. Let's do something like that. Would be a gift. So I think, people need to understand that about themselves and certainly, and I think what you mentioned there, that one point, Barb, that you mentioned is that people need to be comfortable within themselves. I think that's the biggest point here is you have to be comfortable with yourself to say no. And it's really hard. And for people who value, especially extroverts that value the social experience in their community and their group, if they're not in the group, that's really hard. So, I don't know that we have a solution here on the show, but it's important to recognize it at first, right? And just to know about it. If you know about it, then you can decide like how you want to manage it. Do you want to get new friends? Do you want to talk to your friends? Growing up, my friends knew there were certain non-negotiables. I never smoked pot. It just wasn't a big deal. They would smoke pot and be like, I don't care. You guys smoke all you want. I don't care. I'll hang out with you guys. I'm just not going to smoke. And they were cool with that, right? Like they knew that was my line. I wasn't going to cross it. And I think for everybody, they have to realize what's your line and what are you willing to do and not do. And you have to, be able to communicate that with your friends. And if you have good friends and they're friends, then they should respect that. So, but it is hard. I do want to recognize that it is hard. So Megan, let's talk a little bit about, because when people are getting into debt, obviously there's some big challenges there, but it's not always just the debt, the expense is also the income. So how do you, when you're kind of working with families, how do you help them kind of manage that? Because as you said, like it's not just the people, they have families and the families have debt. And so how do you manage all that?
Like in terms of, I'm not clear.
Just like conversations you're having with them and you're helping them kind of like with this aspect.
In terms of like if they have a family member in trouble?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times, first of all, I talk to my clients constantly, right? Because of the complexity of their financial situations, there is a need to be in constant contact. And also layered in that is the estate planning, because then you get to you get to know everybody, because you've got to understand who's going to struggle with managing the money. But I think a lot of times I get brought in to other family members' situations when it's a problem that nobody can solve. right? And so what is being asked is a wealthy family member is being asked to help with the problem. And the thing that most of my clients struggle with helping others is they don't want to be a Band-Aid, and they don't want to just be a quick fix on something. They want the problem to be solved permanently. So what a lot of times my clients do is, rather than, also get sucked into the debt solving issues, they make choices for estate planning reasons to also help prevent debt. So what a lot of times will happen is, I have clients who will have grandchildren or nieces and nephews who, they're going to have to take loans out to go to school, right? And so we will make a decision that rather than take out loans, that we will offer to pay for their education in full. And so we will earmark funds for that. The way the gift tax rules work is, provided you pay directly to the institution, you are not limited on the gift amount. And so a lot of times my clients will do things like that, because if they help their siblings' children go to school, it'll alleviate the pressures on other areas of debt, so that debt can get paid down. So we're often trying to be strategic in how we help. And it's also in a way so that people feel empowered. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a lot of times the work that we do to solve. And it's often given with this idea of, this is a gift, and if you ever in this situation, you need to pass it down, because this is the legacy of our family, going to what Barb talked about with legacy.
Yeah. All right, great. So I want to touch on another topic before we kind of wrap it up here, which is the obvious big elephant in the room: college. Right? You can be as diligent as you can and not spending on your credit card, but college is right now the biggest expense that most people will ever have, even more than a mortgage in many cases. So Barb, how should people look at college? I mean, that's, you could do all you can, but you're still going to have this mountain of debt.
This is so difficult today. And I so empathize with parents today who are bringing up children with these enormous college bills. I think one of the things to do, because you can do it less expensively. It's not unreasonable to start at a community college. Do your first 2 years at community college, live at home. I know it's not glamorous, it's not the experience, but you're going to save a ton of money. And then when you do take out a loan, make sure that the young person in your life understands what he or she is doing. I had an experience a couple of years ago where I was at my husband's place of employment. He works at a doctoral program. He's a faculty member there. And I was talking with one of the graduate students there, and this topic of debt and money came up. And she said, well, I'm not really worried about all the debt. I'm not worried about what this costs or what that costs, because I'll just get my debt forgiven. And I just spend whatever I want. And I had to hold myself back from going insane, because first of all, there was a basic lack of understanding that you're borrowing this money. This is your liability and your obligation. Whatever you're spending now, you have a likelihood of having to repay that along with interest. And this is what it's going to cost you in the future. And this will impact everything else you can do in the future financially. If you get it forgiven, that's wonderful. But there are no guarantees. You can't go into taking out debt with the expectation it is going to be forgiven. And so, I'm going on a little rant here.
Go ahead.
So in terms of debt, I get that you're going to have to take out some debt. The keys are, look for the lowest interest rate debt you can get. understand the loan that you were taking out. And Megan, I know you went to college and graduate school, became a lawyer during a time where debt was, something that you had to do.
I still have my college student loan.
Yeah, you still have your college debt. So in essence, you're probably a good person to talk about, how do you manage that? How do you minimize it? And
in terms of
just
college debt?
Yeah. But just the one other thing I want to say is treat that debt as something you don't want a lot of, and that you don't want a high interest rate, and that you want to minimize that debt if you can by working part-time, by being aware of how you're spending when you're in college. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Megan.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I see with college, which is, and my parents did the same thing, is we're not talking to kids along the way. We're making financial decisions for them to commit them to debt that they might not want, right? So a lot of my clients I've noticed start to talk about saving, the 529 plans, what they're doing with their kids earlier on. And they're involving the kids in the discussions earlier. Because I think the thing is, when and I had this issue a couple of weeks ago with my best friend's daughter. She said she wanted to go to NYU. And NYU, great school. It's $80,000 a year. I got clients with kids there. And that's just the school. That doesn't cost getting them there, feeding them, the fact that they're going out in New York City. And I talked to her about it. I said, well, what are some of the career goals? And she just, walked me through it. And I said, well, have you looked at Rutgers? Have you looked at CUNY? Have you looked at SUNY? Like, there's a lot of ways. Her goal was to go to school in New York City, right? It wasn't that she wanted to go to the Tisch school or anything, but I explained to her, I said, look, if you went to CUNY, right, the City University of New York, these are the costs. If you go across the bridge to Jersey, I mean, Rutgers is a great deal. And then you come out and you won't be in debt, because if you take on $320,000 in debt, and that's the minimum probably, you are closing a lot of doors of opportunity that you might want to have open. And so I think it's getting kids to think through this about what they really want. And it's hard because we're asking 18-year-olds to make major life and financial decisions, and it's not fair. But I think it's important to at least bring them into the conversation. And then just shifting really quickly, because the debt-free guys brought this up, and it's something that really irks me big picture. I hate how credit scores operate in this country. It's a system that was created years ago that lacks transparency, right? And is basically stacked against the average American. And it's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. And I really wish there was a way it could be disrupted where it can be put together a little bit more fair when you get to factor in things like where you grew up, like financial literacy, like, income, like things more than just some of the bill pay stuff that they look at, which has to be part of it. But credit scores are just, it's not fair how they process them today. And it hurts a lot of Americans.
How not fair? How? Just so people can understand.
Well, first of all, I mean, they won't even release, I don't believe they release part of the computation and how they do it. Stop me if I'm wrong there.
They don't, but I think people have a pretty reasonable idea about how it goes, but you're right. It's not released as proprietary, but I think people have a good approximation.
Right. And then I think, and they've started to do it, but let's say if you take low income areas, right? Just paying your phone bill and your electric bill is a big deal, right? In certain income areas, should certain things get weighted differently? Because, for other areas, paying your phone bill it's a no-brainer, but for others, it's a struggle, right? Like, how do you weight those types of issues into that calculation? I just find it really difficult. It's one of the things that irks me. That irks me, and the fact that buying a home in this country irks me. I wish Joe Biden would introduce an appropriate first-time home buyer credit that helped people, because it's ridiculous that people can't get into homes who can afford the mortgage payments. They just can't get the down payment.
Well, I think that's, I mean, that's a good point. I think that's not necessarily a policy issue. I think it's more of like just the market economics. I mean, I
Yeah,
agree,
the
but it's,
no,
it's low interest rates.
I'm a tax person.
No,
This
it's low
is
interest
tax
rates.
policy, but
It's
no,
high
but
prices that you can't afford the high prices because of the low rates. That's the problem. I mean,
but
I
we
agree.
had a
but, I mean, I
first-time
understand.
home buyer credit here in California right after the 0809 crisis. And it was a 3-year credit if you purchased a home. And basically what it did is it absolved you of California tax so you could save the money for the down, like to help pay for it. And there are things they can do within the tax code that could benefit that would not help our high earners, but it would help regular people get access to housing.
But that's on a state level. I mean, they should do it on a state level. I
Well, they
agree.
can do it on a federal level. You could totally create some form of credit for first-time home buyers. It's doable. And it
Yeah.
meets public policy requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic. I'm all for that kind of trend, but I think there's other things that that are being masked, which is, you know, people used to be able to afford first-time home buyer, like a lot of people were, and now they can't because homes are so expensive. So I think there's a lot of aspects into it. I don't object to that. I think it's a good idea, but I think there's other issues that obviously make it more pronounced, which is also a problem, which we never address, which is my frustration. But anyway, so let's say final thoughts here. Barb, what are some final thoughts you have before we wrap it up?
You have to spend some time with yourself and with your family and the people that are within your sphere to think about what matters to you, how you want your income to work for you. Because if you start diverting a portion of your income today into retirement saving or whatever, you're going to smooth out those earnings so that you've got money for your entire life. If you choose not to save for retirement, if you choose not to invest, and you instead choose to consume now and take on debt in order to finance that consumption, not only are you going to create a lot of unlasting happiness, you're going to create stress for today and for tomorrow. So I just suggest that you take a minute to really think about how you're living your life. Many people today do not feel like they have the money to meet their expenses because inflation is insane. And so we can whine about it, but then you also have to strategize. What can I do today to minimize my income? To minimize my expenses and to boost my income. Take on a side gig, take on a side hustle. And before some people choose, I'm just going to start paying cash so I feel more in control. Get a strategy to get a rein on your spending, whether it's doing Quicken to track your expenses, Mint, or any other way. Be in control of your finances, and that will help you stay in control of your life. My name is Barbara Friedberg. You can find me on YouTube at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance and at Robo-Advisor Pros.
Thanks for coming on, Barb. Megan, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Barb says. And, I think being financially resilient is hard work, right? And it's looking at things that we don't want to look at. The debt-free guys talked about it. Like, people are uncomfortable knowing what they spend. But the biggest number to me that determines retirement success is what you spend, right? You can have a very large balance sheet, but if you're spending a lot of money, you're not going to be financially successful there. So do the hard work, make it a ritual to look at your expenses, even if it's once or twice a year that you do this look back, and really ask yourself, am I okay with some of this instant gratification of doing stuff today? Or am I better served putting off some of this and saving for tomorrow? So I'm Megan Gorman. You can find me at Forbes.com/Megan Gorman. Kirk, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, Megan. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.